what is going to happen is, just as the previous world wars transformed the financial system, I think that there will be a different financial system emerging from this.
It also then will certainly affect US arms sales. It will affect the US military industrial complex, which is one of the more successful parts of what remains of American industry in the United States. Hello and welcome to the 55th Geopolitical Economy Hour, the conversation that illuminates the fast-changing political economy and geopolitical economy of our times. I'm Radhika Desai, and you are watching Radhika Desai, Geopolitical Economist. The latest twist out of many twists and turns in the US-Israeli war on Iran has been Trump's announcement that the war in Iran will be ending very soon and that it'll be very complete pretty much. And it has been ahead of schedule. At the same time, he also claimed that we've already won in many ways, but we haven't won enough. All this ambiguity is clearly very purposive, which we'll come to in a minute. Iranian authorities, however, called his bluff more or less immediately, stating that they would determine when the war would end. They ruled out talks and said that they would not allow 1 liter of oil to be shipped from the Middle East as long as the US-Israeli war continued, and Trump threatened to hit them 20 times harder. So Trump is, with all this ambiguity that he was using in yesterday's press conference, he was clearly preparing an off-ramp. And this was also proved because in a subsequent meeting, or a meeting on the same day with Republicans, he basically never talked about the war and basically filled his talk with them with domestic concerns. Trump is basically worried about markets because this is what is at stake. For him, it's not just about the price of oil. It's not just inflation. It's not just the higher interest rates that inflation will definitely bring. It's not just also another recession, as if Trump cares about the economic pain that recession brings. It's really about the future of the dollar system, the chief mechanism through which the United States sucks up value from around the world. After all, higher interest rates, which would become necessary if inflation became very high, would prick the multitude of bubbles, or the everything bubble as they are collectively known, on which the dollar system depends. However, it is also likely, so we know this, that Trump never likes the markets reacting badly to what he's doing. You remember what happened after the April 2nd Liberation Day stuff. So he doesn't like that. We know that. However, there's another thing to consider, which is that it is also likely that he's building this off-ramp because, notwithstanding the sheer amounts of money the United States spends on the military, and as you know, Trump has already promised to increase the $1 trillion annual expenditure, which is probably an underestimate, to $1.5 trillion annual expenditure. So this is what he's projecting. But even though they're spending all this money, the Iranians have shown that they can still outproduce and outsmart the United States on munitions and intelligence and reconnaissance and radar and so on. And the imbalance between the two sides is showing. So how are we to understand this bizarre military conduct of the Trump administration, especially considering the fact that he got elected on a platform of not starting any new wars? And already he has become the president who's probably bombed most countries in the world, certainly in their first year. On the one hand, they may not have achieved any of these aims they have successively and simultaneously declared. They have wanted regime change, they have wanted leadership change, they have claimed to want to destroy Iran's nuclear weapons, they have wanted to destroy Iran's destroy their delivery capabilities, their missile capabilities, to destroy their munitions and their military. And of course, all these claims are clearly hollow. On the other hand, economic costs are mounting. So, with me to discuss the many ins and outs of our of this crazy war that Trump is engaged in is an old friend of geopolitical economy, indeed one of our constants, Michael Hudson. Michael, welcome.
Well, it's good to be here to help you launch your channel's new series, Radhika. I
Thank you
hope it's
so
a
much.
success.
Brilliant. Thank you. Michael, there is so much to discuss here, as you know, and as we were discussing before we started recording. But perhaps let me change tack a little bit and ask you to comment on a very specific thing, which is that you said in some of your writings and interviews that you think that we are at the start of World War III. And you've been arguing, or rather, some other people have also been arguing the same thing. Jeffrey Sachs is another example of somebody who says that we are at the start of World War III. Now, given that Trump is stamping down this operation, do you think this diagnosis stands? And in any case, why did you originally think that we are at the start of World War III?
There are three main reasons that I said that. Right now, the world's living in the short run. The United States and Europe have been able to roll back the price of oil because the United States, in particular, has accumulated a huge oil reserve in the last year. And Trump has said there's not going to be an inflation in the United States because whatever the world price of oil is going to do, we're going to roll it back down. And by releasing the oil reserves, the national U.S. government oil reserve into the market, so there's not going to be any shortage of supply here in America. And in fact, in practice, much of this oil reserve here will enable the U.S. oil companies to make a killing by exporting more of their oil to Europe, where the price is going to go up very substantially. Europe has very low oil reserves and even fewer gas reserves. So there's going to be a financial crisis there. And it's not going to end soon because whatever Trump says, well, we'll stop bombing now that we've bombed you enough and our attempt at regime change has failed. Let's just have a ceasefire, just as he would like a ceasefire in Ukraine, now that the Ukrainians are losing so much. But Iran has said that the war is going to go on until it's achieved at least its number one aim. And that aim is to drive the United States and its military bases out of the Near East permanently. Well, that means a long war. And there's now talk that it'll go at least until the end of this year, in December, after the November off-year elections in the United States. And this is going to cause such a disruption if the Hormuz Straits continue to be closed that it's going to lead to economic collapse of many industries, if not economies, especially in Europe and other countries. So to anticipate your disagreement, I want to say three things that make it World War III. First of all, it's about oil. And oil involves all countries because the entire world economy is dependent on oil for its power, its electricity, its heating the homes, lighting the homes and businesses, and the key to production, and on natural gas for making things such as fertilizer, for glass making, and other things, all especially fertilizer. Now that Qatar's or LNG export facilities have been bombed and destroyed for the time being, it will take at least a month even to begin repairing them. And without access to Hormuz, all of that trade is going to be blocked. And so this is going to create a worldwide economic crisis. You and I have spoken about de-dollarization for the last year, and the effect of all of this is going to be to isolate the dollar. And that makes this war very different from World War One and Two. Iran has said that it will not have peace with the Arab monarchies in its neighborhood unless they begin disinvesting from the United States. The whole problem is that Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the Arab republics have a symbiotic relationship with the dollar. And the result of what's happening now will be a move throughout the world away from the dollar. Well, this is the opposite of World War I. The United States insisted upon Europe paying its war debts for the arms that it bought before America entered the war. America imposed pro-creditor rules that essentially bankrupted Europe and led to deflation. And then again, after World War II, when the United States had benefited from all of the flight capital and refugee capital from Europe in the 30s to the United States had three-quarters of the world's monetary gold held by central banks. Well, and was able to dictate rules based on the US dollar and its control of gold. This time it's quite the opposite. You're going to have a crisis in not only the dollar, but on dollar debts, because as the price of oil and gas go way up for other countries, especially the global South countries, they're not going to have enough money to pay their dollar debts. And this forces a choice on them. What are they going to impose austerity on their own economies by paying the higher prices for oil and cutting back wages and government spending in order to pay the dollar debts? Or are they going to declare a moratorium on their dollar debts to the United States? I can see a moratorium. And so what is going to happen is, just as the previous world wars transformed the financial system, I think that there will be a different financial system emerging from this. And there also another major difference from World War II. After World War I, and you saw a collapse of the monarchies throughout Europe. Essentially, Europe moved toward democratization. It looks like there's going to be a collapse of at least some of the Arab monarchies in the Middle East. And the king of Bahrain has already fled the country for Saudi Arabia. And Iran has made it very clear that if the monarchies, which are in a symbiotic relationship economically and militarily with the United States, don't drive out the United States from access to their own territories militarily, that they're going to be in a state of war. So that's there will be a similar difference. Today, I can see the monarchies changing into which are very anti-democratic. That'll change. But the third fact is even, I think, more important for the world context of what's happening. After World War I, the League of Nations was created to prevent future wars, ostensibly. And even though Woodrow Wilson, the American president, had played a major role in pressing for it, the United States didn't join because it said it would not join any international organization that it could not control. Well, the result is that after World War II, they created a new kind of organization, the United Nations. But America insisted in having veto power in it, and essentially has increased its domination over the United Nations to essentially make it an ineffective organization, unable to prevent the war, unable to impose the rules of its charter that call for civilized international relations, civilized laws of war. And the capital, the UN, is is going broke because the United States has refused to pay the arrears that it's mounted up for the last few years that members have to pay the UN, and it's withdrawn from major UN organizations such as the World Health Organization, $250 million old. And the Secretary General Guterres has said by August, the United Nations head office in New York is going to be broke and will have to be closed down if the United States doesn't pay. And the United States doesn't pay. And it's clear now that something as a result of the oil war that's occurring has to be the creation of some new international arrangement that the United States and its satellites cannot control, that will essentially aim at imposing the same kind of rules of law that the UN Charter was supposed to do, and this time back it up with some kind of military power. So you'll never again have something like President Clinton's bombing of Serbia in the 1990s, or America's and Israel's attack and on not only Gaza, but then its illegal attack, breaking all the UN rules of war in its attack on Iran. So these three major changes, I think, qualify it for really a world war.
Well, okay, so this is, and I'm asking this question because, of course, everything you say is true. I agree with the substance of the points you're making, which are relevant to thinking about the current war, which is really historically a very significant war. But I would like to suggest to you that for the very reasons that you are enumerating, and a few more, we should not think of this as World War III, but as imperialism's last stand. And these two points are connected because I've done some thinking and research into why we call those wars that took place between 14 and 19, and then again between 39 and 45, why did we call them world wars? This is a very important and interesting question. And in doing some research, I believe that the idea, the concept of a world war really began to emerge in the last decade of the 19th century. So people were already talking about it. And there is a place where particular essay actually that Engels wrote in which he anticipated what he called a world war. So Frederick Engels, the companion and collaborator of Karl Marx, and his prediction is astonishingly accurate. He says that armies will be at each other's throats. Europe will be laid bare like it had just had an attack of a swarm of locusts, etc., etc. So he saw with incredible accuracy what was going on, and it seems to me that the reason why he called this a world war and what he anticipated a world war, and why eventually the wars were world wars, is because at that time, if we agree with Lenin, and you have to agree with him, he was merely stating a fact. When he wrote his Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, one of the things he said is that in 1914, the entire world was already divided up among the major imperialist powers. And so now there was no more territory to acquire. The world could not be further divided among these powers unless they engaged in a war of redivision. So that's why and that's indeed exactly what the First World War was. And as you and I have discussed before, the First World War and the Second World War were really a single great imperialist conflict. The First World War and the Second World War were umbilically connected because basically, if the First World War was caused because all the major powers were competing with one another for markets, colonies, economic territory, and what have you, then the defeat of one of them by others was not going to resolve anything, and it did not resolve anything. And eventually, things only got resolved because in this liminal period, this violently liminal period of 1914 to 1945, the world changed dramatically. And communist forces emerged who played the Red Army, the Soviet Red Army, and Chinese Communist forces played the decisive role in ending the war in Europe and the Pacific, respectively. So anyway, the point is that these conflicts had to be called a world war because once the European powers fought with one another, and they fought with one another because they were capitalists, they would inevitably draw their respective colonies into the war, and they did. And in fact, this is something that, the role of colonial forces has never been properly acknowledged, and even that of the Russians and the Chinese is only beginning to be acknowledged. So, having made that prefatory comments, let me quickly go through the 3 points you raised. Insofar as this war is about Iran eliminating um, the United States from the region, it's a regional war. Insofar as it's about the isolation of the dollar, it's about the decline of the last remaining major structure of imperialism. And of course, insofar as Iran is defeating the US armed forces, it's also about the decline of its companion structure, which is another major structure of imperialism. The US dollar system and the US army are. And and of course, you also mentioned in relation to the Gulf region, you mentioned oil. But I think that one of the things this war will do is it will accelerate the search for alternatives to Gulf oil. That is to say, and what I mean by that is not only will it accelerate the shift to alternative energy sources, of which there are many, and China is really, in terms of making them feasible on scale, he's making them possible on scale. And at the same time, I think that there are critical voices emerging in places like Europe to say, look, folks, why aren't we rebuilding our relations with the Russia and using Russian oil, energy, etc., etc. So vis-a-vis that, I dealt with the point of the dollar. Something we'll probably come back to. So the last point about the League of Nations and the United Nations, here I would make a small but important correction. Of course, I regret it as much as you that the United States holds a veto in the UN Security Council. But remember that the UN Security Council also contains Russia and China. And they are there for historical reasons. They are there because without their role, the Second World War would never have been ended. So that the creation of the United Nations is already a compromise between imperialism and anti-imperialism. And I would say that what we will see coming out of this is a United Nations in which the imperialist powers' influence will be further diluted. It will not go overnight, but it will definitely, the dilution of that influence will accelerate. So for these reasons, I would say we, in a certain sense, we underestimate the progress away from the imperial world we have made by calling the current war a world war. And we should not do that.
Well, your points are all very good. I think what we're really talking about is definitional in one sense. What is a war? Well, my position is, and I'm sure you agree, as you've just pointed out, that war is not only military, it's economic and social. And it's restructuring, because the only way that a war can be resolved on peace is by a set of treaties and agreements that restructure the world's economic and social relations that led to the war in the first place. That's why Europe's monarchies were overthrown. That's why Europe began to move towards what at that time was social democracy. And I think there's also, remember, the end of both wars was a new division of national boundaries. The Sykes new design for the Middle East that cut right across ethnic lines and created all of the problems we're seeing today, such as dividing Kurdistan among three different countries. That was one of the results of these wars. And these post-war solutions created new instabilities that ultimately failed in the end and led to a new war. So I think you're quite right in adding the dimension of the world's energy and the role of the environment in international law and international relations. Absolutely right. A shift away from to alternative energy sources such as wind and solar energy. President Trump has said he opposes this for two reasons. He's withdrawn the U.S. from the Paris Agreement and from all other organizations. His first act on the first day of becoming president was to cancel the American contracts with the wind power installations, the windmills that had already almost been installed. He stopped construction. He said he didn't come out and say my biggest campaign contributors and the American government's campaign contributors for the last century have been the oil industry. I've just been elected thanks to the campaign contributions of the oil industry. I'm absolutely backing oil against all alternative sources. Global warming must intensify, even though it's going to cause climate change and famine in Africa and South America. He said, because oil is the basis of our foreign policy. We want to limit the whole world not only to oil, but to oil under U.S. control. That entails sanctioning oil from Russia, oil from Venezuela, oil from Iran, and we insist not only in control of oil, but on the profits from that the oil exporters make. We want to make sure that the world's oil trade is the profits from this trade are invested in U.S. dollars to support the U.S. currency. So the financial aims of using oil is a tool of to weaponize the world oil trade, to force other countries to follow the United States demands on sanctions, on tariffs, on the threat that, well, we're going to create chaos in your economy by closing off the U.S. market. If you don't agree to our demands, we'll close off your oil trade. This American threat is to sanction Russia, Iran, Venezuela, is just as serious as closing the Strait of Hormuz. They're equally important, and this is going. The moving away from oil removes this fundamental basis of American foreign policy and American diplomatic power over the world. So that's
I mean,
a global consequence of
yeah.
the result of this war.
I mean, personally, I would say that I think that reading Trump as, or let me rephrase that, the argument that Trump's foreign policy is about oil or it revolves around oil is, I think, to greatly overestimate the rationality of the Trump administration, even though I think that actually, even if it were true, it would not be a very rational policy. But let me explain to you what I think. I mean, maybe three quick points. Number one, I would say that the centrality of oil to Trump's rhetoric, strategy, policies, etc., has nothing to do with understanding its world economic role. I think it has everything to do with the fact that the oil magnates have given him a lot of money in order to get elected, and he must do. That's why he's been engaging in this drill, baby, drill rhetoric, and so on and so forth. So the oil and oil magnates have been playing a more important role in the U.S. for, I think, quite frankly, they have played an important role for a long time. But particularly when the alternative energy sources lobbies came up, they have been fighting a battle back, and they have funded Trump in order to do that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that actually, again, while of course oil is critically important as in the ways that you say for the world economy, there are increasingly alternatives available to Gulf oil. So Gulf oil and gas, that is to say, there are other sources of oil and gas. Russia is another, etc. But also there are alternative energy sources. So I would say that that's the second point. The third point is that the dollar system, while of course it is the dollar's value is affected negatively when oil prices go up. So they go in different directions, opposite directions. When oil goes up, the dollar goes down, and vice versa. Fine. And in that sense, of course, it matters. But of course, I would say that since the 80s and the 90s, the dollar system has been much less reliant on the price of oil and much more reliant on this vast financial merry-go-round that keeps bringing foreign money into the dollar system. The creditocracy, as you and I have also called it, but also essentially the series of financial bubbles that have had to be blown up in order to create an artificial demand for the dollar. So for all of these things, I think it's not so much about oil. So, but anyway, I mean, let me, we're kind of slightly at least straining from, or straying rather, from understanding the historical significance of this conflict. I mean, to me, there are two parts of it. One is, as I say, if there are two major structures of American dominance, namely the dollar or financial system and the military system, what are the ways in which this war and Iran are challenging the two? So I'd say that, for example, if we take the military aspect to begin with, Iran has basically outsmarted, from what I understand, and we don't, one has to go into the alternative media to get an understanding of this, but my understanding is essentially that Iran already sort of bought into a Chinese made sort of, system of electronics and radar and communications and all that. And that has allowed them to pinpoint and destroy American and Israeli capabilities of intelligence gathering, reconnaissance, surveillance, on which the defensive equipment like the interceptors and so on are based. And I think that has left a part of the reason we got the announcement that we did on the weekend is that it's finally the penny dropped in the U.S. Well, among the U.S. authorities, that they really are not able to attack Iran back. Secondly, of course, they are attacking U.S. military installations, more generally affecting U.S. military capacity. I read somewhere that the great aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, which had been brought up to near Iran, had to be taken much further back because otherwise it would be vulnerable to a Iranian missile attack. And where it is, it's no longer of much use in the war against Iran. And of course, Iran has also excelled at manufacturing cheaper armament. So in all of these ways, this amounts to a real undermining of the manner in which the United States has fought wars for the last quarter century. This idea that overwhelming air power can manage to overwhelm it. Iran has outsmarted them militarily. It's astonishing.
I agree with your caveats, Radhika. You're right. The United States now is not anywhere near as dependent upon OPEC countries recycling their earnings into oil as when they created the petrodollar phenomenon in the 1970s, putting vast deposits in U.S. banks that the U.S. banks ended up lending largely to global South countries. You're right. There's been a shift, and the role of oil in U.S. diplomatic strategy has been largely to be able to isolate other countries from access to oil. And the United States has already affected the world oil trade, especially Europe's oil trade, with the North Sea pipeline blow up and with the sanctions against Russia after 2022. It's already done the equivalent of Hormuz, at least as far as Europe's concerned. So you're right there. Uh, uh, Regarding the OPEC oil recycling, uh, uh, I guess my new concern with this isn't on what OPEC countries will be with their new oil export earnings, but they've already had accumulated trillions of dollars of sovereign wealth fund and personal holdings by the monarchies in U.S. Bonds, stocks, and bonds. And now they're going to start disinvesting in U.S. securities. Saudi Arabia and other countries have already said that now that the oil, they're not able to get oil earnings every month because Hormuz is shut, their budgets are in trouble. They have to meet the budgets that are themselves, in many cases, highly leveraged. And so they have to retain their sovereignty by selling their foreign securities. Well, most of the foreign securities that they're going to be selling are U.S. securities. So you can expect now a beginning to rewind and reverse the whole flow of oil earnings into U.S. financial markets. You're now going to see a reverse, a drain of OPEC kind of sovereign wealth funds and personal investments out of the U.S. market. I should have. You're quite right to say that this has to be emphasized.
Yeah, and I mean, so this is the sort of the military aspect. We dealt with that, and your response brings us to the financial aspect. And so I said earlier that the higher interest rates that will be necessary in order to deal with the inflation that will come as a consequence of this will prick these bubbles, and that will create mayhem. But so will the mechanism that you are pointing to, which is that these Gulf states, and their sovereign wealth funds and so on, they will start disinvesting in these asset markets that are basically in the United States. They are part of the everything bubble, and that will create a problem. And I would wager that if there is high inflation, if there is recession, as now seems quite likely because a lot of the damage to oil production facilities and oil transportation facilities and so on has already been done, that Europe also will feel the effects of this. And Europeans and the Japanese, both of whom are dependent on energy imports, they will also be feeling the same issues, and they will also be starting to disinvest. And this is also going to create further pressure on the dollar system, so that for all of these reasons the dollar system will also come apart. So in a certain sense, let you respond to that first, and then I have a final question to raise, because we should probably be winding up soonish. But please go ahead and take your time.
Good point. I think that there's a lot of junk economics that is shaping the U.S. Financial market and foreign investments. As you'd pointed out earlier, the worry is that, well, with oil prices going up, that's going to increase inflation. But in many ways, the result will be exactly the opposite. The effect of the breakdown of the financial system and world trade in the 1930s, in the Great Depression, was deflation. And if you're going to have major industries in Europe and other countries that are dependent on natural gas and oil, they're going to be closed down. And there's going to be a cutback in national budgets, cutting back social spending, cutting back all sorts of spending that is going to be deflationary, not inflationary. So in terms of the actual spending of income and the income flows in the economy and consumer prices for those other than for luxury goods, I can see a deflationary effect of all this, not inflation. And there's
Absolutely.
already a movement of flight capital into the U.S. government for safety, because at least the U.S. government can always simply print the money to pay its bonds in dollars, at least.
Or at least that's what the investors think. Or actually, I mean, I'm not even sure they think that anymore. Their problem is that they have no other alternatives. They know that the US's ability to print money is also increasingly narrowing. That is why, for example, even though when Biden was, when Biden was in office and MMT was just doing the rounds, like everybody thought you could spend your way to heaven, etc., without taxing anybody. In fact, the Biden administration had to raise taxes, because even for the United States, there's a limit to how much it can just print money, and certainly a limit as to how much it can just borrow money. So but I also wanted to say, so yes, right, at the moment there is this kind of haven status, etc. Although there were previously a lot of signs that the dollar's haven status is under challenge, but nevertheless, I think that the biggest junk economics, and I love this expression that you have coined, the most important type of junk economics we have right now is the belief that somehow the dollar is, or certainly was, a natural world money, because the US was the most important and powerful country, etc. And as we've discussed so many times, I mean, the dollar has never served the world very well. It has never served the world very well because there's nothing natural about its role as the world's money. And this role has had to be supported by all sorts of artificial connivances that have done huge damage to the American economy and to the world economy and to ordinary working people everywhere. So this is another a huge problem. But this all of this brings us back to this question. In fact, I was thinking the other day, when this war on Iran is going on, like whatever happened to the Don Road doctrine? Like 2 months ago, people couldn't stop talking about the Don Road doctrine. Venezuela is explained by the Don Road doctrine. There is no such, and I had been arguing that there is no such thing anyway. But the point is, what is prompting the Trump administration into engaging in this international adventurism, Venezuela, now Iran. And, in this press conference he gave yesterday, I believe, or somewhere, he mentioned that Cuba could be next. So I hope that is not the case for the sake of ordinary Cubans. But anyway, this is this shifting ground. But basically what Trump desperately needs is some kind of big victory that will cover him in glory, because short of that, there is no way of counteracting his abysmal numbers, which have been declining after the first month or two after he took office and have kept declining since. The Venezuela misadventure made no difference whatsoever. And I doubt that this Iran misadventure, which I think one of the spokespeople of the Iranian Foreign Ministry called Operation Epic Mistake. But anyway, this Operation Epic Fury may well turn out to be Operation Epic Mistake, and it's going to create more problems than Trump ever bargained for. But I say that the only way to explain what Trump is doing is his declining numbers and his need for something, as I say, that will cover him in glory. And why does he need that? For the simple reason that in order to understand Trump, you have to understand that Trump only promised all the MAGA things like better jobs and reindustrialization and, not fighting wars abroad, etc., in order to get elected. Once he was elected, he was doing more or less the same things as Biden would have done, because he and Biden served the same American ruling class, except that in Trump's case, the US states' ability to somehow reconcile these competing imperatives has become unmanageable. That's the key.
I think you're right. I think that Trump, for his part, is going, no matter what happens, Trump will simply declare victory and walk away, even if it's a total defeat. But the result for the rest of the world that lives in reality-based foreign policy is going to see that the end of U.S. power, that the United States has lost the war, that its weapons don't work. Well, there go its foreign weapons, its military trade. The weapons have not defended America's allies in the Middle Eastern monarchies. They don't work. It's unable to provide protection against Iran, and just as it's been able to unable to defeat Russia in Ukraine. And so this whole myth that is the enabling fiction underlying American foreign policy, the world needs to support America's new Cold War spending to defend it against Russia attacking Europe, complete fantasy, or Iran having an atom bomb, complete fantasy and direct lie. Of course, Iran does not have weapons of mass destruction any more than Iraq did in 2003. All of this means the end of U.S. diplomatic power and economic power. That's global in scope, and it also reverses the case of what happened in the aftermath of World War I and II. For me, that's the equivalent of a world war in the sense that I use it, of being social and political as well as just military.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. Of course, all wars are social and political and not just military. And indeed, I would say that, the old adage that an army marches on its stomach I mean, you have to produce well, the food, of course, but also the food, the clothing, the arms, the equipment, etc., which a sustained war needs. And the United States is absolutely not prepared for that. The United States thought, in its kind of magical thinking, which unfortunately pervades its military establishment and certainly pervades the Trump White House, uh, that they were going to go in, secure a quick victory. And, for a couple of days, I'm sure they thought that the fact that they had managed to assassinate Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei would have given them a great, that a great advantage, but that proved not to be the case. They have Iran has now a new supreme leader who, if anything, is going to be even more determined, hardlined, and he, for one, is going through a baptism of fire. Imagine being put in a position of the supreme leader of your country in the middle of the deadliest war it has ever been in. So he certainly is going through that. But anyway, to come back to some of the more interesting points that to me that come to my mind just listening to you is that, number one, one of the interesting consequences of this is that, given that this war is going to expose the United States way of war for what it is, which is a lot of empty hubris, it also then will certainly affect US arms sales. It will affect the US military industrial complex, which is one of the more successful parts of what remains of American industry in the United States. So that's going to be really interesting. And the other part of this, and the other thing is that, insofar as this war, uh, insofar as Iran wins this war, and I think it will definitely lead, perhaps not tomorrow, but in the coming months and years, it will lead to the gradual expulsion of the United States from the region. What happens to Israel is another whole question altogether in those circumstances. What happens to Israel is another question. But it will certainly do that. But still, that leaves this as a regional war. I mean, that's what I want to underline, is that the reason why the First and Second World Wars were world wars is because the main parties to those wars were imperial countries that could drag the rest of the world willy-nilly into the war. And it is a mark of the progress the world has made away from imperialism, that this is no longer possible. The United States can't even draw its closest allies sufficiently into the current war. It has not been able to draw the Europeans into this current war to the extent that it would have liked, which is why Trump makes all those nasty comments about Keir Starmer and what have you. So in that sense, and the other really interesting thing is that nor can Iran. The Russians and the Chinese are playing in their own interesting. They are supporting Iran. Don't get me wrong. They are supporting Iran. Without their support, Iran would not be able to do what it's doing. But they are also open to talking to the Americans, at least as far as we know. Trump's visit to China at the end of this month is going ahead. Amazing. And so, anyway, what I mean to say is that it's only a world war if the whole world is involved. And interestingly, terrible as this war is, the world is not involved. And that's why, but what we will see, the historical importance of this war lies in the fact that it's going to lead to vastly accelerate the diminution of American power, vastly accelerate the expulsion of the United States from the Middle East. And so it will be a terrible war. It will be a historically extremely significant war, but it will not be a world war.
I can agree with all these points, Radhika. I think the word you were looking for is paper tiger. The question is, will the result of this Iranian war be lead to a foundation for world peace? That's what the former two world wars did. If that's really the question that's facing us. I can't imagine what President Xi and President Trump will be talking about. I have the idea that each of their reports of the meeting in a few weeks is going to be as opposite as the U.S. reports of U.S. meetings with Russia about Ukraine. But yeah, I think you've summarized the issue very well.
Well, I that's exactly the question I was thinking of just this morning before we started talking, Michael. What will Presidents Xi and President Trump talk about in Beijing at the end of this month? And I would say that I don't know, obviously, and I like you, I will be watching for their statements and readouts and what have you. But I can bet you about two things. Two things will definitely happen. On the one hand, I would say that Iran will use its power over rare earths and critical minerals and so on to grab the United States by the short and curlies and say, unless you essentially behave yourself and behave a lot better, you're not getting any of this. So that's one thing that will happen. And the United States will be there begging China to be able to have enough of these things. I mean, what I'm reading in that, Richard Medhurst did a fantastic a show about just how badly Iran has damaged American military facilities as well as Israel's Iron Dome. So, and according to him, and he's a better judge of this than I am, but according to him, all these facilities that have been destroyed by Iran, thanks to the targeting technologies that they have access to from the Chinese, Russians, and so on, the military facilities that have been destroyed would take at least a decade to rebuild. That means a decade of absence from the United States, and a decade is a long time. So in that sense, I would say that, yeah, I can imagine what these people are talking about. Trump will be begging for this, and of course, he will also be begging for all sorts of other things, for China's support for the dollar and what have you. We will see what comes out of this, because basically, Trump is going there as a supplicant. China is receiving them as the kind of hegemon, the person who is able to grant things. China is not a hegemon, don't get me wrong, but I'm thinking of just a personal encounter. But the point is that that's one thing. And very quickly, I want to say that, on the matter of nuclear weapons, you were talking about, Iran does not have nuclear weapons. Iran has so far refrained from having nuclear weapons, at least until now. There was even a fatwa, a religious injunction against developing nuclear weapons, because they were deemed to be, as they indeed are, profoundly anti-human weapons, which no country should be using. So, but it would be very, very surprising if now, given what the United States has done, the Iranians don't at least seriously consider having nuclear weapons. Because if there's one thing we know from the history of the MENA region, the Middle East and North African region, is that Saddam Hussein or Assad or Muammar Gaddafi could be taken out because they either did not have or they forsook their nuclear weapons or nuclear weapons programs. Meanwhile, no matter how much the United States may revile North Korea remains militarily inviolate. And this is a very, very important lesson because you see, the real problem with the NPT is not that Iran is developing nuclear weapons, which is not even factually true. But even if Iran were developing nuclear weapons, the bigger problem with the NPT would be that the parties, the five recognized nuclear weapons powers in the treaty, the five members of the UN Security Council, are not doing what they need to do in order to pursue nuclear disarmament. And of those five, the United States, Britain, and France are the chief obstacles. I would say that historically, the Russian, Soviet, and the Chinese position on nuclear weapons has always been defensive. They have had nuclear weapons because they need them to defend themselves against extremely powerful foes, but they have never had an offensive nuclear strategy. The United States and Western countries do. And this is their one weapon. This is the one weapon that they can use to somehow dominate the world. At least that is their wish. So anyway, I mean, just a couple of thoughts to share with you.
Well, this is exactly the discussion the whole world's, not only Iran, but other countries are all going to be talking about in the next few months. Yeah, I think
Exactly.
we've decided it.
Absolutely. In fact, I mean, I wrote an article about this some years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, called "The Long Shadow of Hiroshima." The A Long Shadow of, I think it was 2 years ago, Long Shadow of Hiroshima, Capitalism and Nuclear Weapons. You can't understand nuclear weapons unless you take the historical significance of capitalism seriously, for historical significance of capitalism for humankind seriously. And so, yeah, that sort of makes sense. Yeah, we've again, we are in our wonderful conversations, we kind of often stray a fair bit from our theme. So maybe, Michael, you want to make any closing comments on the significance as you see it
N-
of the war on Iran, and what do you expect in coming weeks and days?
Well, I think we've analyzed that the Hormuz will remain closed, especially now that the United States has just blown up an Iran tanker. The Iranians are at least letting its own ships go out especially on the way to China. The United States is now blowing up Iranian ships. There's no reason for Iran not to totally block off Hormuz until such time as it gets what it wants. And as we've just spelled out what it wants, starting to with U.S. withdrawal from the Middle East. That's what it's all about, and that's going to take a long time. This is not going to be a short period of time. So we'll have plenty to talk about maybe after the China visit.
Yeah, that certainly, and I would simply add to that that I would say that once again Trump will have gone into a military adventure, and he still hopes, I think, to rescue some kind of little. Or to identify some sort of a little achievement, which he will then claim, portray as a great military victory, just as he portrayed the kidnapping of President Maduro and First Lady Celia Flores as a great military feat. So he will try to do that. But in the long run, as far as the midterms are concerned, I think he's just going to end up with lots and lots of egg on face. Of course, a lot of other people have lost a lot more. They have lost lives. People are losing health with all this pollution going on, with all the bombing of oil facilities and so on. So it's a very serious thing. But I would say that if there is one meaning that all this horrendous death and sacrifice will have, it is that the United States will be further disciplined.
Well, Trump cannot survive. Last night on ABC News, they had his statement saying, we've just won the war. We've prevented Iran from having the atom bomb to blow us up. And having a rising price for oil is a small, short-term price to pay for the fact that in the long run, we've prevented Iran and any other country from ever having an atom bomb. Well, we've just the rest of the American voters, I can assure you, are just as realistic on this as you and I have been discussing.
Absolutely, Michael. Thank you so much. I think that was a great conversation. I'm sure you'll be back lots of times
Yeah, I
to
enjoyed it.
discuss this absolutely crazy world in which we live, which constantly requires us to think about how to understand it, how to unravel the knots upon knots of confusion that entities like the Trump administration create. Thank you so much, Michael, and see you again soon. To everyone, thank you for watching us. If you like it, please please share it, please subscribe to this channel. Radhika Desai, Geopolitical Economy. Goodbye for now.